Are people really interested in the truth? Or are they more interested in preserving their beliefs and their positions on those beliefs? And how is it that people come to believe what they believe in the first place? Where does the seat of our belief come from? Some people believe things that are clearly not true, such as the bizarre thinking that the earth is flat, that no rocket is able to go into space, and that we never went to the moon. One of the first times I remember being exposed to a seriously wrongly held belief was back in the early 1980s as I was standing in line at the bank during the time Ronald Reagan was president. This was in Florida, where the state legislature had just voted to end vehicle inspections, and someone behind me emphatically stated Reagan had just ended vehicle inspections by telling his friend, "Yeah, Cletus, you don't have to get your truck inspected anymore. Reagan just signed it." Reagan was president of the United States. He had absolutely nothing to do with lawmaking in Florida. But two rednecks in a podunk Florida town went on in life that day, firmly believing Ronald Reagan was the savior of their pickup trucks, which were probably a danger to them and everyone else on the road. While the creators of the mega social media platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and others had grand ideals of bringing the world together and making communication between people and groups more easily accomplished, it seems today as if these platforms are used to increasingly attack and separate individuals from one another. The chances of convincing someone on any of these social media soapboxes to change sides, drop a wrongly held belief, or at least to admit there may be a different perspective on an idea they hold is nearly zero. It is hard enough to change someone's mind in person. It is many more times as difficult online. As a general rule, people who debate online are as convinced as ever of their wrongly held beliefs. No matter the evidence you present, no matter what the documentation and data clearly states, you can provide sources and links and expert testimony to back up that data on whatever subject you're discussing. Yet all your opponent will do is dismiss your sources as partisan and or biased, and then attack and discredit the experts and the sources with ad hominem, often repeated sound bites, or outright lies. And if all your facts and sources check out as unassailable, you will then come under scrutiny as a bigoted know-it-all, with your detractors exclaiming, "Well, don't you have an answer for everything?" I once engaged someone on Twitter on the subject of abortion, and they were thoroughly convinced all pictures of aborted babies online are a fabrication of right-wing anti-abortion fanatics. They were of the belief that any graphic picture showing the blood and intestines of an aborted baby was in actuality jelly and made to look as if it were a baby's internal organs and blood. One has to wonder what this young woman thinks a real aborted baby would look like. But I guess the big question is, how do you argue with someone who has taken a position such as this, where what they believe is absolutely not true? Never mind the fact that you have laid your eyes on the actual canisters and jars filled with aborted babies recovered from the dumpsters of abortion clinics. Your online opponent is convinced you are lying. And since they think every photo in Google Images is a fabrication, you have no way to reach them. Their neural pathways are irreversibly burned into their gray matter in a way which has given them a false reality with little hope of sane recovery. This is cult-like thinking in need of serious deprogramming. In another Twitter discussion, I responded to a wrongly convinced person with sources from her own side, first with evidence from a feminist site which supported a major provider of abortions, which she dismissed as a pop culture site. I then backed that up with data direct from the source itself, Planned Parenthood, which she stubbornly dismissed as me interpreting the data wrong, despite an exact quote from this site absolutely proved my point. This young lady was thoroughly convinced of her position and had no intention whatsoever of changing. She had no interest in the truth of what the data clearly showed, and there was no chance in helping her. She then cut off the discussion with me after she wrongly thought she had found an instance where one of my sources was lying. A measly 140 characters, or the present day 280, at a time was all this person needed to think she had won one more Twitter storm. She did not have time for research, reflecting, or reading opposite positions on her wrongly held belief. 140 character moments of time had set her mental state on an irreversible path. In her mind, she had won. She had thoroughly convinced herself one of my sources was lying because she was unwilling to do further research, and that was that. She had chosen to travel down another wrong path, oblivious to the possible consequences. She was a warrior not for truth, but for her cause. Her ammo was misinformation, and her mission was to spread it with no regard for whether or not it was actually true. So what does all this add up to? Where does a country go from here? What can actually change us? What are the consequences of millions of people who vote, infecting the system as they parade around with their erroneously and sometimes dangerously held beliefs? How does this affect who runs the country? And how does it affect how laws are made? And which laws get top billing and end up being the ones enforced? How much damage does it do to our nation and our societal thinking when legislators make law based on a popular position of the masses, based on a belief that is entirely false or has been purposely fabricated? Just examine the rabid, fabricated, misplaced hate for the NRA, which has been building after the horrible school shooting in Parkland, Florida. The shooter, in this case, most certainly could have been stopped had local law enforcement authorities or the FBI done their job and taken the several dozen opportunities to bring him in after more than 40 calls to his residence. Law enforcement, neighbors, school administrators, and students all knew this crazy young man was going to do something. They knew he had it in him to be a school shooter, and no one was surprised when he carried out his well-publicized on social media sick fantasies. But who do the liberal media and politicians blame? Well, the NRA, of course. How they make a connection directly from the NRA to such a sick young man while ignoring all the evidence at how spectacularly law enforcement and school administrators failed is simply beyond comprehension. The only explanation is that they are doing it on purpose. Can we repair this? Can it be fixed? Can people go to the polls and vote for elected officials based on reality instead of who can manipulate them the best? Can people pay their taxes and send their children to school and go to church based on truth instead of propaganda? Can the country, and on a larger scale the world, run on something closer to the truth than what we currently do now? I have no solutions, and I don't know if there are any. It is horrible to think we are on an ever-declining path until we simply fall into violence or some kind of a revolutionary reset. What is it that makes a sea change, an entire paradigm shift in people? What is it that gets the masses to drop their idiotically held beliefs and get on a serious pursuit of truth? Is war the inevitable reset to a more humble society? I hope not. But how is society supposed to change on a large-scale basis? It is excruciatingly difficult to change the culture of a company, much more an entire nation, especially a nation with such vast and varying beliefs. There have been calls for and attempts by large online companies such as Google, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook to police their platforms more closely to weed out so-called fake news. But attempts such as this will ultimately rest on someone who determines what constitutes newsworthy information. There are clear instances where people published blatantly false information, such as reports of dead celebrities or politicians being killed in accidents when they haven't been. But reports such as these are easy to deal with because they are blatantly false. Most anything other than that has the great potential to be driven by the radical biases of those in control of these large social media platforms. While Facebook's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has a clearly socialist bent, those in control of Google, YouTube, and Twitter appear to be building their platforms on social justice warrior liberal mindthink. Dozens of conservative commentators have been banished or had the distribution of their content severely throttled back on these platforms, when few, if any, major liberal players have seen any significant loss of reach. Then there are those we call judges, those who are tasked with the responsibility to interpret the law, who can't agree on what the right thing to do is. There have been many 5-4 Supreme Court decisions proving that people who have dedicated their entire lives to studying law cannot agree and have widely different interpretations of what laws and even the Constitution means. How do we turn this kind of decision-making over to the whims of those who control Facebook, YouTube and Twitter, who are building artificial intelligence to figure all this out. Will they not be programming their own strongly held biases into these machines? So how do we get people to gravitate more towards truth instead of the propaganda that's infecting our world today? While it doesn't appear there is any quick solution, one place to start is for people to learn to do their own research and turn off the sources of mass media that are constantly vying for attention through clicks and views of their content. Their driving mission is to either earn more advertising dollars or worse, to promote a destructive, radical agenda. The mainstream media of our current age is nothing less than poison. It infects the minds and hearts of millions with a relentless stream of false and purposely manipulating information designed to push propaganda to further that agenda instead of anything resembling the truth. Turning off the mainstream source of news and learning how to find source documents by using Google, even though there has been evidence of them pushing people to certain search results or whatever search method you choose, to cross-reference breaking stories at least lets you somewhat verify facts presented by the big networks and newspaper gatekeepers of information. Unfortunately, no one can convince anyone else to pursue truth. That has to be a desire that leads to your own purposeful action, not relying on any preconceived notions of what you think you will find. It is imperative that you ask yourself if you really want to discover truth, regardless of where it takes you. The alternative, if you choose just to believe mainstream thought, is that the powers that be have simply made you a cog in their machine. They have you right where they want you.